Hello, everyone. So in today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the sentence fragment. Before we start with the explanation of the lesson, I would like to remind you of the two types of clauses, guys. It is essential to put in your mind that we have two different types of clauses. The first type is the independent clause. In the clause, it is a must to have a subject and a verb. However, they can't form together. If you have a subject and a verb, it's not necessary to form a complete, meaningful sentence. How and why? Let me take a look at the following independent clause, guys. The independent clause is the main clause. It looks like a sentence. It is a sentence. Why? Because it has a subject, it has a verb, it has a complete meaning, and it can stand alone as a sentence. So that's the first type, which is an independent clause, which is equivalent to the sentence. So independent clause equals a complete sentence, can stand alone, includes a subject and the verb. Okay, that's an example. Any complete sentence is an independent or should include an independent clause. Let's go to the second part, guys. Here in the dependent clause, I should have a subject and the verb because simply it's a clause, but it cannot stand alone as a sentence. Why? Because it's missing one important component of a complete sentence, which is the complete meaning or the complete thought. How do I make the following a complete sentence? By joining the dependent clause with the independent clause. So guys, the difference between the independent and the dependent is the complete meaning or complete thought. Here I don't have a complete thought, while in the independent clause, I have a complete thought. Let's continue. Let's start with our lesson. Okay, so I have a complete sentence and I have a sentence fragment. In order to say that this is a complete sentence, we need a subject, predicate, or a verb, and a complete thought. If it's missing any of the following, guys, we call it a fragment. A sentence fragment misses a subject, a predicate, or a complete thought. Let's take a look at the following. How do we know whether this is a sentence fragment or no? We look for the subject, predicate, and the complete thought. Let's take a look. Missing a subject. Under the bed. Who was under the bed? What was under the bed? This is missing. So I don't have a subject here in this sentence. So the subject in this sentence is missing. So that's a fragment. The man in that house. What was that man doing? We don't know. So that's missing a predicate or a verb. So that's also a sentence fragment because it's missing the predicate. The last one, after they finished their dinner, I have they, subject, finished, verb, but still it's missing. Why? Because this is a dependent clause and this is missing the complete thought. And that's also a sentence fragment. What we care for, guys, is not only identifying the fragments, it's mainly how to correct the sentence fragment. How do we identify the sentence fragment? By asking for the subject, asking for the verb, and checking whether it is reflecting a complete meaning. So if I don't have the subject or the verb or the complete meaning, so this is a sentence fragment. And now we're going to start with strategies for correcting a sentence fragment. What do we do in order to correct the following sentence fragments? Step number one, or choice number one, because I have 4 choices. All of them are correct if used correctly. If the sentence is missing the subject or the verb, I can simply add the missing part. Let's take a look at the following fragment. People who have a sense of entitlement and they care for the rights and feel absolutely no sympathy for for those less fortunate, even when they take advantage of their services. Guys, on purpose, I decided to choose a long sentence. Why? Because usually we get like confused. When we have a long sentence, we immediately think that since this is a long sentence, so it's a complete sentence. And this is not the rule. How do we know whether this is a complete sentence or it's a fragment? How do we know? We identify the subject by asking who or what. We identify the verb by asking what the subject is doing, and we check the complete meaning. So it's not by the length of the sentence, it's mainly by the 3 components of a complete sentence. Okay, so the sentence here is talking about people, so people is the subject. People, who have a sense of entitlement and feel absolutely no sympathy for those less, all of the following part from whom? Till services is an adjective clause. It is describing people, but it's not telling me what they are doing. So it's not completing the sentence with a clear, complete predicate. So this is a fragment. According to the first rule or the first strategy, what's the best way in order to correct this sentence? Adding the missing part. The missing part is the verb part here. So I keep the sentence as it is, and at the end, I add don't deserve respect or any other predicate. In this case, it is correct. So guys, the subject should be completed by a verb, subject and verb. And in this case, it is a complete sentence. Some of you might ask me, and this is an adjective clause, what if I cross who? And in this case, the sentence will be people have a sense of entitlement and feel absolutely no sympathy. Guys, grammatically, this is correct. But if you read the sentence, the meaning will be different. Here, you are talking about people who have a sense of entitlement. If you cross the WHO, if you cross who, in this case, you're talking about everyone, including me and you and everyone. So the meaning is different. That's why, guys, it is better if you add the missing part. Okay, waiting patiently at the doctor's office. That's the verb, not a verb, but it is telling me what's happening. Who is waiting patiently? So the solution here is to add any subject. She is waiting patiently. I am waiting patiently. The patients were waiting patiently. So any subject is correct here. If I ask you to correct the sentence fragment. So rule number one, if the missing part is a subject or a verb, simply add it. Rule number two, if the fragment is a dependent clause, cross this. Oh, that's so easy. I have a dependent clause. The dependent clause starts with a subordinating clause, subordinating conjunction. I simply cross it. Or add something to the sentence, to the dependent clause in order to make it complete. Look at the following. If you read all of this clause, you will notice that it is incomplete. It is a dependent clause. Because my broken heart, which you have left hardly beating in my chest, here, which you have left is a relative clause. It's describing the heart. So still it's incomplete. Is the reason for my endless suffering. Okay, I got the point. Because your heart is the reason for your endless suffering. What? So guys, that's the dependent clause. How do we make it complete? Dependent clause can never be complete. It cannot stand alone. It needs another independent clause in order to complete it. So rule number one is adding an independent clause in order to make it meaningful. Rule number two is changing the following dependent clause into an independent clause. How? By crossing the subordinating conjunction. As simple as that. If you cross because and start with a capital letter, it will be my broken heart, which you have left hardly beating in my chest, is the reason for my endless suffering. Another choice, this is the dependent clause. I added an independent clause in order to make it meaningful. I will suppress my emotions and become stronger. In this case, dependent clause followed by an independent clause, meaningful, complete sentence. Rule number three. If the fragment is a gerund or participle phrase, if it starts with a gerund or if it starts with a participle, the difference between the gerund and the participle, they are both verb plus ing. Gerund acts as a noun, participle acts as an adjective. So what can I do if it starts with a gerund or a participle? I can simply add a helping verb or an action verb. Russell Brand, the English comedian, being one of the funniest celebrities alive. This is a phrase, it's incomplete. Why? Because I have being instead of having a verb. So that's a phrase. In order to have a complete sentence, you need a subject and a verb. Being is not a verb. Being here is a participle because it's verb plus ing, which is acting as an adjective. So that's a participle. What do we do if you have a participle phrase? You simply add a helping verb or an action verb. Russell Brand is one of the funniest celebrities alive, and the sentence will be complete. If you have verb plus ing, like taking, doing, which is a fragment also, you can add a helping verb to it. So Russell Brand taking the taking an important role in this movie, period. Taking is an action verb. I simply add a helping verb for it. So instead of saying taking, it will be is taking or will be taking. Or I can change taking, which is a participle, into an action verb, takes or took or will take. So in this case, I avoid the gerund or the participle phrase and I put an action verb or a helping verb and the sentence will be complete. Last step, I think this is the last. So the last strategy, I attach the fragment to the sentence that comes before or after it. That's the easiest. We do research on the internet. Independent clause, subject and verb, complete idea. Whenever we plan to make a major purchase, okay, let me read it. I have a subject and I have a verb. Is it complete? I'm going to read it separately. Whenever we plan to make a major purchase, then what happens? We don't know. So it's missing a complete thought. That's a dependent clause. How do we make it complete? By attaching the dependent clause to the independent clause. If you start your sentence with a dependent clause, you need a comma after it. So whenever we plan to make a major purchase, comma, we do research on the internet. Or I can simply keep it as it is without a comma, without a period. So we do research on the internet whenever we plan to make a major purchase, period. In both cases, it is correct. And that's it, guys. That's all what you have to know about fragments. Hopefully, I'm not going to find any more fragments in your writing. Thank you.